Welcome to the Fedora 20 desktop installation. Here we're going to take you through the installation of Fedora 20 so that you can use it as a desktop system. I've been using Fedora now as a desktop system for nearly 10 years, if not longer, and I've not used Windows for a very long time, and very happy with using Fedora and able to still run my business and do everything with it. The first screen you'll see if you install Fedora from a CD-ROM after you've downloaded it from the internet and burnt it as a CD-ROM, is you'll get three options. The default option selected is to test the media and install Fedora 20. Generally, if it's got this far, your media is probably okay. You can troubleshoot the system, which means you can get the system back up and running in the event that you've got a failure or you've forgotten your password or something like that, but there are different ways of doing that, and we'll cover those later on in the series. And you've also got what we're going to do now, which is to install Fedora 20. So we use the cursor keys, as you can see, to select that, and the colouring changes for us. And we press the Enter key to start the installation of Fedora. In a moment, the screen will change and we'll see some boot information coming up on the screen. This is letting us know that Fedora is getting ready to actually install at this point. At this point, the graphical interface will now start, and it will ask us for a language to install the system from. In this case, I'm going to select English, and I'm going to ask it to do English United Kingdom because that's what my keyboard is set up for. So on one side you'll specify your language you need, and on the right hand side you'll specify the keyboard layout specific to your system. From here we'll select Continue so we can move to the next screen. On the next screen, what will happen is Fedora will do some checks on the system to make sure that the installation source is good and we have some software and all the relevant software available to us that we want to install. We'll also have the default selection of software, which we'll go and change in a moment, and I'll tell you some of the reasons why. It identifies our network for us too, and we can change the network configuration, which we will do shortly. It tells us that we have selected English UK keyboard and our language is United Kingdom. So I'm going to change the time zone as well, because currently I want to be in the United Kingdom for that change. So you can click anywhere on the map to where your location is, or you can start to select from the regions and the cities above to make those changes. We can also turn on or off network time. If it's turned on and you're attached to the internet, then your computer system will actually get the right time from the internet, and your computer can be kept up to date for the right time whilst it's in use. So I'm going to leave the network time on, and I'm going to select Done. So my time zone is now London and Europe. Another thing we want to do here is to select the installation destination. At the moment it tells me it's automatic selected partitioning, which is why it sort of gives me a warning to say that it's done that, because in this case by default this will take up more of your disk than you realise. It uses a thing called the Logical Volume Manager, and again we'll talk more about those later in the series. So I'm going to select this, and what I'm going to ask it to do is I want it to install to the default disk that I have here. I'm going to select Done because I want to change the partitioning scheme for my disk, and as you can see here the default is to select LVM, and it will take up a lot more of your disk space if you use that. So I'm going to go for Standard Partition. I click on Customize Partitioning, and it takes me to a new screen where at the moment we have no partitions at all. We can ask the system to create it automatically for us, in which case it will present various configurations for us, but I'm going to create just two simple partitions, and what we'll do after we've got the desktop up and running is we can show you how to section this out a little bit later on. Ideally, in most cases, we'll want to have the operating system on one partition and then our user data and everything else to do with us on a separate partition. That way, if we want to upgrade Fedora or if we need to reinstall Fedora, all of our data can remain in place if need be. But we'll do that as another installation later on in this series. So I'm going to click on the plus because I want to add a mount point here. And if I click on the down arrow, it gives me various default options. The first one I want to create is I want to create a swap space. If we don't create a swap space, Fedora will actually give you a little warning about not having any swap space available to you. You don't have to have it, but I'm going to put 200 megabytes in as a swap space. some people will use sort of half the size of their physical memory, the RAM that you have installed in your system. Some people will use 1.5 times the size of your RAM, and some people will go for 2. Modern day Linux systems don't actually need swap space because they will work with the memory quite effectively. But if you're planning on using a desktop, you should have at least some in there. And given the fact that you've probably got some very large disks and quite a lot of memory anyway, 1.5 times is more than enough. In fact, 1-to-1 on memory to the swap space is plenty. So in this case I'm going to use 200 megabytes, and I'm going to click Add Mount Point. In this case, the disk is telling me that it's already got some space in use, and it's not allowing me to create any further disk space at this point. So what I need to do is to remove the selected items that are already in place, and it's showing me that by looking at the Fedora 20 installations here. So at some point on this disk there was an operating system installed, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it that I want to use these two, but we're going to delete them all first. So I'll delete that one, and we'll delete the other disk as well. So we can do that by having it selected in blue, and we can click on the delete. I could have reused them, but what we actually want to be able to do here is to obviously go off and install as though it was a brand new disk. So we can see down at the bottom here I've now got available space of the whole disk, and the total space is exactly the same. So now in this case we'll go back and we'll ask it to create our swap space. So we come down to the swap and we get 200. So in some cases, if you've had a Windows machine installed, you'll get exactly the same thing, and you'll want to go through that same process of deleting all of your partitions so you have a completely free disk, and then click the Add Mount Point. So from here it gives us a summary, and it tells us here that it's going to use SDA, which is the first hard disk on your machine. If you've got more than one hard disk, it will go SDA, SDB, and SDC, and so on. The 1 represents the first part of the disk, where it's actually slicing it up now into sort of parts of a cake, so to speak. So you imagine a round cake that you're cutting up into sections, and that's what we're doing here. So we're going to add, click on the plus again, another mount point, and the most important mount point that we have is the root partition. So I'm going to click /, which is the root partition to the Unix system, and as you can see, if I hovered over the desired capacity, it tells me I can enter 20 gigabytes, or I can put 500 MBs, or whatever it is. So the MBs is the default. If I don't put anything in here at all, and I just click Add Mount Point, you'll actually see it will take up the rest of the disk. So a handy way of dealing with things. So ideally what you want is to specify the one that you want to take up, or the rest of the disk, as the last thing on there. It's also defaulted the file system to the latest ext4. If I click on that, we can see various different file systems available to us, but we'll deal with those more later in the series. And we can see it's mount point, and as I said, SDA2, so this is a second slice on that disk. So we'll click on Done, and it tells us that it's going to destroy all the previous partitions, and it's going to create new ones, and what format it's going to do them in, and where it's going to mount them. So I'll accept those changes, and we can see everything's ready there. I'm now going to tell it that I want my network to start when it starts up the system. So I'm going to click on the network configuration. This machine has one physical network Ethernet adapter. That's a wired one rather than a wireless one, but if you've got a wireless one, it will show you that as well. Here we can see that its default is actually going to be on, and down the bottom here I can click on Configure and tell it how I want to deal with the interface. So first off, it puts me in Ethernet, and it tells me the unique address for that device. If I click on General, I can see that it's not going to automatically connect by default. So I do want that to happen when the system starts up, so I need to tick that box. So that's the reason for coming in here. If we don't tick that box, you won't have internet connection when the installation is finished and your machine starts up. Also down here, all users may connect to this network. So the idea here is that users have control over the network interface for when they're logging on. That way you don't have to do anything for them. If I click on the IPv4 settings, we can see here it will get the address automatically for us, which, you know, in most cases, if you've installed a Windows machine or plugged it in, it's automatically got an address for you. So the most important thing is in the general section is to click on the automatically connect this network. So we click Save, and then we click Done at the very top. The last thing I'm going to do is tell it that I don't want the GNOME desktop. I'm going to change it. You might desire the GNOME desktop. It's quite intensive, so if you've got a graphics card and a lot of memory, you might find it quite useful to do it. But if you're a Windows user, the KDE Plasma workspace is probably a better one to use. It's very, very similar start menu to what you've got. It also is quite intensive, so you'll need a bit of memory and a good graphics card to run it effectively. If you've got an older machine with less memory, sort of 2 gig of RAM or something like that, or even less, and a smaller graphics card, these two guys here, the LXDE and the XFCE, are the lightest weight and quickest desktops available, and they again have a very similar look and feel to a Windows start menu and stuff like that. Also Cinnamon and Mate also have a very similar Windows look and feel to it. But I will go for the KDE Plasma workspace because that way it will look more like Windows for you. On the right hand side we can see it then gives us a selection of other software that we can install. So we've got various KDE applications if we want to install them. Educational, multimedia support. KDE has its own Office, but there are other Office tools that we can use. And we're going to leave that at the moment, and what we're going to do is going to ask it for administrative tools. And then what else we'll ask it for? Let's have a little look, see what we can find in here. We've got some development tools for libraries and various other things. I'm going to install those because the system that I'm using, I need to do some extra pieces before I move on to showing the rest of the series. And the same with the development tools, because I need to just perform a few things before I continue. You don't need these unless you're planning on doing some C development or Java, in which case you might also want to install Eclipse as well. And then as I go down, we've got Libre Office, which is an Office productivity suite. I'm going to install that because most of you would want something that was equivalent to Office, where you can do spreadsheets, word processing, and PowerPoint type presentations, as well as being able to do drawings and stuff like that. So I'm going to install that one as part of my operating system, which you'll notice you don't get with Windows. You have to go out and buy that and then install that yourself. So with our operating system we get this tool as well. We get a lot of other software that's not shown here as well that we can install later on. So I'm going to select those components there, and we're going to go straight for the installation. So once I've selected which components I want, I click Done, and then I have the system go back through a check of the installation source. So we can see here the warnings are there, but if everything is good, it all goes grey, and then what it'll ask me to do is to click the Begin Installation. So we'll click Begin Installation, and we can see that Fedora starts creating the partitions that we've just asked it. So that's actually doing some formatting and clearing off all of the old data that was on those disks. And then it starts the package installation process, so it's actually going to check and make sure everything's good to go. While it's doing that, we can set ourselves a system administrative password. Root is the user that can do everything on the system, and we're going to create ourselves a user that we can use to log into the system. So let's click root, and at the password point, what it's going to ask us to do is to type in a password. So I'm going to type in a very basic one, just to show you that it actually looks at the password itself. So you can see here I've typed a very, very basic password, and it tells me it's really weak. If we type in a stronger password, so the bars go up to the green one, and it'll tell you that you've got a good strong password. But I'm going to use a simple one for this, and I'll have to click Done twice to accept that password. If you give it a good strong password, you'll only need to click Done once. So then I need to create the user as well. So you can put your full name in the top, and then you can have a username down here. The username is the important part. That piece there, that's the one that you use to log on. Although with Fedora in the graphical mode, it'll actually show you your full name as part of the login, which we'll see shortly. I'm going to ask it to make this user the administrator user as well. So that means I'm going to be able to run commands to install software, to update disks if I need to, and change things like internet settings and network settings, although we did select that all users could do that for us. So we're going to be able to do more on this machine than another user that wasn't made an administrator. I'm also going to make it ask for a password, because that way if I want to add users, which we'll show you later, then every user needs to add a password to their account. So again, I'm going to put in a very basic password. so that I don't have to remember them. Okay, and then I click on Done, and my user, again, is created. And in the meantime, the system now is showing us that it's installing the various packages. So we've got 330 of 1,369 packages to go. On most systems, that will probably take around about 20 to 30 minutes to do the whole installation. And remember that at the end of this, not only have we got an operating system with various programs that we can work with, which will include music programs and video programs, we've got Office already installed as well with that. So within 20 minutes, you have a fully working desktop. So we'll come back to this as it gets towards the end of the installation. And at this point, we can now see that our installation of Fedora has completed. All we do now is we will click on the reboot button, and the system will actually start to reboot itself. And once it's rebooted, the system will start back up into its full window mode, and also your disk will eject at the same time. So we'll click reboot and allow the system to restart. The first thing you'll notice about the Linux restart is it will show you a menu as follows, and it'll give you a 5-second chance to select the rescue. So you have a rescue mode here, as well as the default boot for Linux. So we're going to let the machine boot the default one. You can let the timer count down, or you can press enter to make the system start. It will then go off and start the installation. And as we can see, we get a nice graphical slider bar letting us know the progress of Linux. And the reason we get the 3 colours is because it's actually performing a parallel startup, and the white one is telling us what's actually confirmed. We can now see at this stage that we have our login session, and since we haven't got a graphical selection, we can change this, and we will do later on. So if you fancy the graphical selection like you get in Windows, then we can have that done. But if you don't get that, here it's telling us that we put our username here. So from my previous entry I put Steve, and then I put in the password that I chose for the user that I created at this point. I can then press enter, and that will log me into the system. And we can see at the bottom of the screen that KDE is actually starting up the system, and different icons will start to appear as the KDE desktop loads. The first initial load is always slightly slower than the rest of your loads because it has to create all the profile and everything else for you first. So it is now starting up the KDesktop, and here's our KDesktop. Down in the bottom left hand corner we actually have the start menu, and as you can see, looking very similar to the Windows, where you've got your favourites that you will always use on a regular basis. We've got the ability to go to applications, and if we click on them it takes us to the next view, and we can go back and click on all applications to take us back to the main level of applications, and we can scroll up and down that list if we so wish. We can take a look at computer items, so we can go to network, the root folder, our home directory, and we've also got the recently used documents and the ability to shut down the machine, restart it if we need to, hibernate it, make it sleep, switch users, lock and log out. So all of the features that you would have in Microsoft, as well as the ability to search for a command. So if we want a calculator, I can type calc and it will give me the choice of the calculator, scientific one, or a spreadsheet if we need to. And if I don't want those, if I go back, it takes me back to the menu that I was last at. As well as that, we have some other items down on the bottom. We've got our sound and audio capability here, so we can select the volumes for our sound devices if need be. If we're on a laptop, then it'll tell us our battery settings and how much charging is left, or how much charge is left of that. And it also tells us about our Ethernet connection, which is wired, and we can see in this case that we are connected. We've also got our time, and we can set and see a calendar if we click on that and change the time if need be too. At the top of the screen we've also got a fast icon thing where we can drop icons into here and use these later. If you really don't want this in the way, you can click on the X and that will get rid of it for you. So we've actually got desktop installed now, and we have got our applications available to us. Let me just go back into the start menu and go to the applications section so you can see the types of applications you've got. So we've got administrative tools, whereby we can add more authentication to the system or create users and groups. We've got down at the bottom. You can set your date and time if need be. You can start and stop services that are running on the system. We'll go through this again later on, and most of these we'll show you as we go through the series. If I go back to applications, as I said, I had some development stuff that I added to the system, but we're not going to go into those at the moment. Some education tools, some games, if you want some games, are there as well, just in case you get bored. We have graphical tools as well, so we've got scanning capabilities. So if we have a scanner attached to the system, we can scan stuff in. Document viewers for viewing PDFs and various pieces, that's already in the system, you don't have to install anything else. A drawing program, which is part of the Office system. An image viewer for viewing images and photos, panorama things, and so on and so forth. And if you want to retrieve pictures from webcams, you can do so as well. And you can also take screen captures and many, many more. The internet, from this point of view, we've got Bluetooth capabilities installed. We've got a basic mail client installed as well, and a very fast but basic email web browser too, along with news readers and other features. And we can install other ones if we want to, if we don't have our favourites already in here. Multimedia. So we've got a sound mixer at the moment, so our system didn't install any extra sound multimedia applications, but we do have a full Office suite, contact managers, mail clients, presentations, spreadsheets, Word, type processing capabilities too. So lots of extra applications already installed for us. Settings that allow us to change the system settings, we'll look at those later on, and various other utilities and items to do with systems such as file managers. A security, extra enhanced security system, and a terminal that allows us to go into the system and do command line level utilities and tools to set the system up. So we'll leave this as the install is done, and then what we'll do is we'll take a look at some other features very shortly in the next part of the series.